So one of the things as a new DM and a maker is I like to make things and I want to make stuff for my campaigns, for my adventures. And so I thought, well, maybe I should 3D print some dungeon tiles. The big question is it worth the time and the effort? Let's find out. So the purpose of this video is not to decide whether or not you should buy a 3D printer. I own one because I'm kind of compulsive when it comes to buying tools, and which isn't really all that healthy, and I use it for a bunch of other things. I am a maker by sort of nature, and the ability to create things using 3D printing technology is extremely appealing to me. Really, the question is, if you have or have access to a 3D printer, is it really worthwhile to create dungeon tiles with them? And if so, what are you getting yourself into? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down based on my experience out of the gate, creating some dungeon tiles, some cavern tiles for not even my most recent campaign, my first campaign. I'm just getting started in this whole thing. So what I did was I found online, and again, sort of early disclaimer on this video, none of this stuff is endorsed. So all of these resources are things that I paid full price for and are my opinion and not paid for. If someone wants to pay me for my opinion, I am more than willing to make that happen. So, be sure to, contact me if you want to talk about that. Now, what I needed was, first of all, the 3D models. So backstory, big picture, I am using a FlashForge Creator Pro. The only thing I've done to it is I've upgraded or created a glass bed for it. So I can print on a glass bed, and I use Aquanet as my, my agent to make my prints stick better. So it's really just out of the box FlashForge Creator Pro. I'm printing with PLA, and I'm using the basic slicer that comes with the FlashForge Creator Pro. I am not a super whiz on 3D printing. I'm not, completely dialed in. So my tips and tricks are really, really entry level. So that's the sort of the technology behind it. The models are from Printable Scenery, and they do have some free models, actually a fair amount of free models that you can print or download and try out before you invest in anything on in their paid line. From a cost perspective, there are open source and free models online, so you can always find that type of stuff. Thingiverse is one place that you can find them. There are others, and folks, feel free to post in the comments other sources for other makers and DMs. But the idea here is that the models are actually readily available and fairly inexpensive. The kit or the set of models that I actually finally purchased was their caverns set, and it was $10. So I'm not going to consider that to be, it's part of the cost, but over the duration of using the models and creating additional scenery pieces, that number becomes less and less and less over time. I think overall from Printable Scenery, their pricing is it's pretty approachable. You can get some specialty pieces for a few bucks. Some things are free. Some things are in the $10 to $14 range, and they have a pretty wide range of things. I'm going to put a link. It's not an affiliate link. I don't get any kickbacks, bonuses. There's unfortunately also no discounts in those links, but I'll put those in the description. Now, I downloaded the caverns because I'm basically, at this point of our campaign, we're in a cavern. So the next thing that I'm going to do is actually grab some of the dungeon wall sets and some bits and pieces and start running a bunch of dungeon walls. So once you have the models, then you drop them into your slicer. You can play some multiple pieces up, and you're off to the races. Now, what does that really mean, though? Well, there are a few basic tiles that you will use, and these are all on what they call the OpenLOCK system. So this is an open source clip system that you can just snap in and you can connect all of your tiles. So these are OpenLOCK tiles. You need floor pieces. It comes with a variety of floors. Some have water, some have just these sort of rock cobblestone-y sort of things. Some have little bridge components. These are basically two inches square. So this is basically a 10-foot, if 1 inch equals 5 feet of movement, these are 10-foot squares. And so you need some floor tiles. Now you could just print floor tiles and snap those floor tiles out and build your maps that way. But kind of at that point, you might as well just be drawn on a piece of paper. The fun comes in when you start to build walls. And so for that, you need corners and you need straight walls and other things. There are a variety of other things in the set. So for $10, you get a fairly extensive set of cavern elements, more than I even began to use. So, you know, to start to build out your scene, you would do something like this. Now, here's the kicker though, and here's the information I could never really get or wrap my head around until I actually did it. Well, how much of anything, time, filament, am I getting myself into? So, the cavern that I made that you're looking at is 4 rooms of varying sizes. And it was, I think I counted it up, there are about 60 some tiles to it. So when you look at that, you need to understand how much filament did that take and how long did it take to print. So I'm done with the caverns. For the most part, I ran out of time. I mean, here's the other thing. You're always doing this right before your friends are coming over in a week. And so, you know, you got to figure out, you know, what can I do in the time that I've got? So that was a little bit of a little stressful moment there. But here's where I landed. These were fresh spools of PLA. So this is how much I used. This one's about gone. I can probably still get a fair amount of tiles, but I was running these, you know, overnight during the day, and I started to get nervous towards the end that I was going to run out of filament on some of the bigger print jobs. This one actually still has a fair amount of filament on it. So, you know, probably in the grand scheme of things, 1.5. Really, at $20 a pop, we're looking at maybe $30 maybe more, maybe $35 worth of filament. So, couple spools of PLA, but not quite. I've still got a lot of tiles I can get out of this. And then time. So time's the big one. We all know that 3D printing takes time. So I tweaked my printer settings to get them to the point where I was striking a balance between the level of quality or detail that I needed and the speed that I needed. Now, one thing on these models, the designs on them really, for the most part, in the tiles that I was using, don't require supports. So kudos to the folks over at Printable Scenery for designing these things, even though we do have, you know, these are straight overhangs. Because the span, the bridging is short enough, we can print all of these without supports. So thank you for being thoughtful to us printers when you were designing these. The openings, again, all of the same thing. Sort of the openings, each of those, the amount of, the steepness of the overhang permits us to print without supports. Now there are some models in their line that do require it, but it's minimal, and I would really be selective in how I applied supports to really speed up printing and reduce the amount of post-processing to get stuff out. So each of these things takes a certain amount of time, and that time increases based on the amount of material you're putting down. So I tweaked my settings a little bit. I bumped up my layer height to 0.25 millimeters. I don't know why 0.25, 0.2. Every little bit matters when you're printing something like this. 0.3 seemed really coarse. 0.2 was fine, but I wanted to squeak a little more time out of it. You can go as fine as 0.1, right? That just takes much, much, much more time. So 0.25, sure, why not? I didn't have any really magical number in there. The base speed of printing, I cranked up to 90 millimeters per second. I've heard people running them as high as 100. It starts to degrade your quality of the print because that print head is flying around pretty quickly. 90, seem to actually produce fine results. Now, these are cavern walls. They're not smooth and they're not pristine and precision and machine surfaces. So as long as I wasn't getting really sort of horrendous print lines and horrendous issues with it, I was happy with that. I'm going to hit these with primer and paint these eventually, so there's even more material that's going to go over these. So we can have a little bit of coarseness on our finishes. I have 2 shells, so outer shells, I set that to 2. And then my top and bottom layers, I kept at 3. Mostly because if you go really low on your top layers or bottom layers, you just don't have enough overlap to fill. And so those do take time, but you don't want a bunch of gapping on your top and bottom layers. Bottom layer in particular, this is sort of the foundation of it. So you really want those portions to be strong. Infill was 15% and triangular. So a little bit faster than hexagonal or other infills, and 15%. You could probably get away with dropping it to 10% and eke a little bit more time out. But with those settings, which I'll throw down crudely in the description, the print time sort of broke down like this. This is your least amount of print time. This is a little bit under an hour. So a flat tile, 2 inches square, is about 52 minutes, according to the slicer, give or take. So let's call it an hour. If you throw a bridge on it, it's going to be a tiny bit more, but really not that much. So any of these flat tiles are in the hour range. Add a wall, and your print time increases, obviously, because you now have to build this wall surface. Walls were about 1.41 hours, so a little over an hour and a half, hour and 3/4. And I was printing these multiple pieces up. So I would print when ever possible. I can fit 6 tiles comfortably on my bed. And so I was printing these 6 up when it made sense. And I was mix and matching as needed to kind of get the right ratio of things that I needed for the caverns. Corners are 2 walls. And so corners take 2 hours. By the time all is said and done, adding another little bit of a corner to it. This isn't quite a full wall, right? So we're about another quarter of an hour to get that. So 2 hours on the walls, and really, really similar for these halls. For these halls actually took a little bit longer, a little over 2 hours. But the hallways are really cool components, and you can connect long stretches of them to the rooms, but they do take a little bit of time to print at 2 hours. The longest things to print were things like these much more solid components. These are some stairs, and these are really cool because they're, again, a different transition. You can imply that you're climbing up into a level or climbing down into a level, but these took good solid 3 hours. So this is a 3-hour print job for one. You also need to print clips. So these clips. So I just printed a big old sheet of them. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 by, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So 78. Is that right? I just quick math in my head. So these took about 4 hours. I printed them at a bit higher quality because they are, they need to sort of fit in and snap, and they need to not be too janky and junky. And so these I just printed at standard PLA resolution, and they took about 4 hours for this. So what does that mean? Did some math, and I'm gonna call it 90 hours of printing. So that's a lot. And it's a lot when you decided to do it and you had 2 weeks to get it all done. So that was my personal pressure to have this done for the next time folks came over for our next, pizza and beverages party and campaigning. And so 90 hours for a set of tiles that will get you about 4 pretty reasonable usable rooms in a cavern or dungeon. So what does this all mean? Well, if you've got a 3D printer or you're wanting to get into 3D printing, you will need to have a fairly reliable machine. So something that you can let run for 14 hours and not have to worry too much about things coming off the bed or filament feeding issues or anything like that. So it has to be fairly solid and reliable. So that takes a little bit of time and a little bit of learning. I actually had 0 print fails. So knock on benchtop, I had 0 failed prints, issues with the printing. So I was really lucky actually in that respect. PLA is really nice to print, and you don't actually need to heat the bed. You don't actually need to use Aquanet or some sort of adhesive, but for me, for peace of mind, being able to make sure that those prints were really firmly adhered to the printing bed really made the difference, and I could actually sleep at night and not have to worry about them coming back to a big mess. So once you've got your printing process down, you're looking at about $30 to $35 worth of material. So that's really not bad. Tile sets I've seen $50, $100 for big extensive sets, more than that. So $35 in material is really not a big deal. Then the other thing is time. And in my case, time was a self-inflicted punishment. I made it stressful because I had a timeline. I had a deadline. If you don't have a deadline and you're doing this over an extended period of time, that 90 hours doesn't feel as painful. You can run them on the weekends. You can run them, when you have time, and you can build up a collection. And now the biggest benefit of it is they're done. Except for painting, if I choose to paint them. But as gray, they don't suck now. I could just continue to use them unpainted. So they're done. I never have to print them again. And these are pretty solid pieces of plastic. So these are going to be very, very, very durable. So, it's a one-time $35, 90 hours of time, maybe if you paint them. But in the end, you have something that will last for pretty much ever. So that's why I sort of started this whole thing. Like, I don't know. I would never, never say never, because I'm, again, OCD on this kind of stuff. Truly, I just cannot stop. So I'm not going to say never, but I don't see myself building or printing tiles for everything. I actually think for things like towns or villages, or when you're actually covering a large area where you want to have a lot of little buildings and things like that, I'm probably going to use printed scenery, like literally like pieces of paper. And I'm actually playing with some online tools to create my own maps and buildings that we can use when we're in villages or cities. I don't have the space to store actually an entire city's worth of buildings. So this is really for cavern and dungeon crawls where it's combat, encounters, and you really want to be in the space and know where the walls are and know where the doors are. And so for things where it's really important encounters, I could see building a set of cavern tiles. I'm probably going to print a set of dungeon tiles and maybe some building tiles that might be part of bigger encounters. But I also think a lot of just drawing on paper, drawing on erasable mats, or using inkjet printed buildings is really the way to go. So a combination of things in my toolkit. However, these are pretty fun, and the folks that came over, my friends that were playing the games, they really thought that it added a lot to the experience. And the nice thing is you could build these in blocks. So as they come up to a room, you can do the reveal and you can pull it out and you can set it on the table and start to build that map, build those rooms as they were experiencing or encountering them. So it is nice that these all clip together. I wasn't fumbling with putting things together while people are sort of looking at their watches and tapping, their pencils and wanting to move on with things. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, actually, because really what I was always looking for was, well, how long is it going to take? How much filament am I going to use? What's really my main investment? And so hopefully this provided you with a little bit of information and answers. If you have any questions about my experiences with this, please feel free to post those down in the comments section. I read and reply to everything really that everyone posts. I don't have that many subscribers right now, so it's really not all that hard. So always comments are appreciated. Please hit that subscribe button. Please hit that little alert so that you know when new videos are posted. And really, as always, I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Thanks.